I get that many times, but somebody recently asked me if somebody is very toxic to me, very bad to me, and it's a bad influence on my life, should I still be around them? Should I still be next to them? And I said, no. If a person is bad for you and toxic in your life and is a bad influence and doesn't take you to a good place, there's not only no reason to be next to that person, rather move away, remove yourself from that individual. And the answer was accepted happily. The person says, oh, thank you. I was hoping you would say something like that. So it's a problem with many, many situations. It doesn't matter right now if it's a marriage or a relationship between a parent and a child or neighbors or many different types of relationships. But in many situations we find that we're dealing with a person in my life that is not good for me. Person is actually bad for me. Gets me upset, gets on my nerve, puts me in a bad mood, insults me, hurts me, humiliates me, and many other things. And one is question, should I try forcefully to make it work? Or should I just keep my distance and move away? And more than that, usually we tend to be attracted or connected or come close to people that were similar to them. And it's not that you're looking somebody with no common denominator and you're starting a relationship. You need to have something, some common ground. So, in regards to what I just said, comes a big question, why? And the answer is very simple, because when there's a contrast, you don't get along with it. If you are with a like-minded individual, then there's not much of arguments. You think the same, you like the same thing, so you attach yourself to people that are like-minded to you. If there's no common ground, and there's too much of a contrast, and it can be, again, between a husband and wife, a child and a parent, and many other relationships, the contrast is too big, it's not going to work. Now, why is that so important to focus on? Because the Torah is commanding us and asking us to be tolerant. And the Torah is asking us to love your fellow friend, right? Like you love yourself. And the Torah is asking us to understand each other and to make space for each other. But the reality is that that's not so simple to do, because it's very hard for me to be tolerant to somebody that has different opinions. And it's very hard for me to be understanding when somebody's actually hurting me, using me, mistreating me. I can't find any place to love and acceptance. So in one way, the Torah is asking me to take two opposites and put them together and work on yourself and be patient and be tolerant, and you should understand, not everybody thinks like you. But the reality is that when two things don't match, why are you trying to forcefully put it together? So we have a little bit of an oxymoron here. Do I need to get together with something that is completely opposite than me, or should I just let it go? And what does the Torah want from me? In this week's parasha, we're in Parashat Mishpatim. Last week we received the 10 Commandments, we received the Torah, and this week we're starting to learn all the laws and basic things. Most of the laws that we're learning in this parasha are between a person and their fellow individual, about damages, finance. But suddenly out of nowhere, with no connection to the context, it's telling me that I'm not allowed to mix meat and dairy. The whole parasha is talking about damages, between if I do damage to you, if there's all sorts of issues in finance. Suddenly, out of context, the Torah is telling me I'm not allowed to mix meat and dairy. Now, of course, comes a big question, one of the biggest questions in the oral Torah and the history of the Torah. What's the big problem? What's the big deal with mixing meat and dairy? I have a perfectly kosher meat on one side, and I have good kosher dairy on the other. One separately from the other, no problem eating. But to put it together, what's the big deal? Not only that, the Torah is also prohibiting me not only of cooking it together. That's the prohibition, by the way. The prohibition is not to cook the meat and the dairy together. But then it continues and gives me another prohibition not to eat it, and then another prohibition not to have any benefit from it. Now, like that, there are a few other things that the Torah doesn't allow me to mix. It's called kilaim. Kilaim means a mixture of something. So in this week's parasha, we are familiar, we're getting introduced to mixing meat and dairy, but we're also introduced later on with not mixing wool and linen. It's called shatnez. And then not mixing two animals together. I can't plow the land with a donkey and an ox together. So this combination of putting two things together that the Torah defines as a prohibition, especially the meat and the dairy, there's no answer to that. There's no clear answer why I should not mix meat and dairy. And then again, brings the commentary for the last 2,000 years. What's the big deal? This is a good kosher piece of meat, right? I can eat that? Yeah. And this is good kosher milk. I can drink that? Yeah. Why can't I put it together? Now, if you can't give me an answer, so, okay, yes, I will accept that Hashem tells me not to do it. But also my curiosity is, what's the reason that if I put these two together, it will cause an explosion, a short circuit? Spiritually, of course. So, obviously, for whatever reason that we'll try to figure out today, why the contrast between the meat and the dairy is dangerous. Why the meeting of these two things is a dangerous encounter. First of all, the most important that we need to take from that not everything fits together. Sometimes you try to make something fit, it's not going to work. And it can be a relationship, and it can be many different things in your life that you see doesn't work. Once, twice, three times. Give it up. Move on. Something else. It doesn't work. Not everything will fit. And the problem is that sometimes when things don't fit, you try forcefully to make them fit. Here we're getting a little lesson that not everything fits. If it doesn't, move on. And it doesn't necessarily have a relationship between you and another person. It can be you and a job you're trying to do, or a project you're trying to do, or something that you're trying to do and it doesn't work. You get the point. It's not a good connection. Move on. Now, when it comes to meat and dairy, there are 3 times, a repetition of 3 times in the Torah that we're not allowed to mix the meat and the dairy. The first time is in this week's parasha, in Parashat Mishpatim. Then we read it again a few weeks from now in Parashat Kitisa. And then down the line in Parashat Re'eh, then we're going to meet again the prohibition of meat and dairy. Which really, if you're looking at the text, as I always tell you, you can't just zoom through the text. You have to stop and read and understand and question. Really in Parashat Mishpatim, our week's portion, and Kitisa, it's not in context. It doesn't make sense. Why is it there? In Parashat Re'eh, it's actually in the context. That's the first time that makes sense that the Torah will tell me not to mix the meat and the dairy. But in this week's parasha, I don't know where. In Parashat Re'eh, like I told you, the Torah is talking about all the forbidden foods that I'm not allowed to eat. So it makes sense that that should be where the prohibition of meat and dairy should be. But in our parasha, no connection. Like I told you, because the parasha is talking about damages, finance, and stuff like that, and out of nowhere, you're not allowed to mix meat and dairy. So, what we're trying to figure out on the surface is why I'm not allowed to mix meat and dairy. I want to get a good explanation. When you tell me not to steal, I understand. Not to commit adultery, but to take 2 perfectly good things that, when they're by themselves, I can eat them, but then put them together, I can't, then at least give me some explanation, because it doesn't make sense. So, Rambam actually simplifies the prohibition, and he says that if you're looking at the text where it's talking about the prohibition of mixing meat and dairy, it's always connected or alongside, next to the mitzvah, what's called bikurim, the first produce that you have in your farm. The Rambam says something very interesting, that, you know, in our days, if a person does a good business deal, buys some real estate, very, very low, flips it, makes a lot of money, that's a cause for celebration. They call it, I don't know if they call it in English, it's funny. It's a word in English that the Israelis use, which they use it as common words, but I don't think they use it actually in English for the sake of that purpose. It's called an exit. So if I developed some software or some program or some high-tech company, and I was able to develop it and then was bought for $2 billion, that's called an exit. In English it's called flipping, switch, whatever. So it's funny, the Israelis call it an exit, but it's a word in English. But nevertheless, when you have an exit, sometimes there's a couple of people, they develop some software, 3 years down the line, Google's buy them for $2 billion. Wow! That's called making an exit. That's a cause of celebration. Rambam says that at the time, Beit HaMikdash, before the Beit HaMikdash, everybody was farmers. And not all the time the produce would work. Sometimes you would plow, saw, rip, and it's not going to work. That didn't work. Not enough water, maybe too much rain. So when you worked real hard on the land and you get good produce, that was a cause for celebration. So Rambam says, what would be the cause of celebration? Let's make a feast. And how do you make a feast? You take an animal, you slaughter it, and you put it on the barbecue. Rambam says, because of the excitement, the Torah comes and gives you a prohibition. Don't get that excited, because you don't want to get to a point that the meat and the dairy may be on the same table, will mix with each other. Okay, so that's kind of a interesting explanation. But that's not sufficient, and that just doesn't give us a good answer, because we're not farmers, and I'm not going to have the problem of that. I have a different problem, that in my refrigerator, the meat and the dairy can be on the same shelf. So really, the prohibition with meat and dairy are, like I told you, 3 types of prohibitions. And that's one of the only things in the Torah that not only that is repeated in the Torah, but also has 3 different types of prohibition. Where do we find it? In the meat and dairy. First of all, the real prohibition, what's called deoraita, that's the cooking of the meat and the dairy together. If I take now a cup of milk, cold milk, and I'll put in it a piece of meat, then the prohibition is from our sages. It's not really a prohibition, because the only prohibition is when it's cooked together, when there's heat involved. So our sages, of course, added, because technically, if I'm going by the original prohibition, I can take a sandwich and put a piece of cheese and a piece of turkey, all cold. Technically, that's not the real prohibition. The prohibition is cooking. Of course, our sages added different fences, different prohibition, that the next one will be not eating them together. The Deoraita, the Torah, prohibits you from cooking them together. Our sages added that you're not allowed to eat them also. And the third prohibition, that I can't have any type of benefit from that. Now, one might say, okay, I'm not eating the meat and the dairy, but I have a restaurant, and I live in, I don't know where, anywhere in the world, and my customers are not even Jewish. I'll cook for them. A non-Jew is not prohibited in mixing the meat and dairy, so I'll cook for them. Torah comes and tells you, you're not allowed to cook it. Doesn't matter who you give it to, even if you put it on the shelf. You can't cook. What is that going to do with benefit? That let's say by mistake I made some type of a dish that is cooked meat and dairy, then I can't even give it to anybody, not even to my animals. I have to destroy it completely. So no cooking, no eating, no benefit. That's pretty rare. We don't find it in many different prohibitions in the Torah, but I have 3 different types of prohibition, and the hint to that is in the 3 times that it's mentioned in the Torah, telling me that it's not only the cooking, it's also the eating and the mixing. So when our sages have dwelled on the question, specifically in the Talmud, then they came to a simple answer. We don't have an answer for that. This is called a chok. There are three types of mitzvot, like three categories. The first category is called what we're learning now in our Parashat Mishpatim. Mishpatim is laws. That's the simple things that you don't need to be a scientist to understand. Not to steal, not to kill, not to commit adultery. You don't need much explanations. It's things that make sense. But nevertheless, the Torah still tells you to do or not to do. The next one is called edut. Edut means testimony. And that's all the mitzvot that we do as a testimony to something that happens. We eat matzah on Pesach. We celebrate Pesach, testimony that we went out of Egypt. We observe Shabbat, testimony for the creation of the world. And like that, there are many mitzvot. This is called edut, testimony. And the last category is called a chok. A chok means a law that doesn't make sense. Red heifer, kosher, mikveh, and all the mitzvot that don't make sense. But nevertheless, Hashem says, that's what I want you to do, so we accept it without asking any questions, and this is called the chok. The Gemara says, our sages say, meat and dairy, we couldn't find any common sense, must be that it's a law, it's a chok, we just have to do it. So, now that we came to this conclusion, we can finalize the class, say goodbye, have a nice day, and you can go home. Meat and dairy, don't eat, don't mix, don't cook, don't have any benefit. We don't know why. We just do it. Thank you so much. But the way one should have their approach is that even if you don't understand everything, then at least let me understand one thing, something. I'm not here to just give up and say, okay, no, I get it. Rather, no, I want to understand something. Because if the Torah is prohibiting it to me, it has to be some type of moral behind it, a musar. Maybe some ethics that I need to learn. I don't necessarily will know why specifically the meat and dairy, but what is the Torah trying to tell me here? So, we have two separate things that when they're separate, they're good, but when I put them together, they don't go together, right? That's what we're focusing on. When I'm saying two different things, I have one side I have milk, perfectly good milk, good. Not that I recommend to drink milk. The milk from the cows are for the calf, not for you. It's not made for you, by the way. There's nothing healthy about it. People think that milk is healthy. That's what they sold you for the last 70 years with all the commercials. Drink milk and the white mustache and all this junk that they're selling you. It's not healthy at all, by the way. If you want to drink milk, then if it has to come from an animal, then drink goat milk. And if you want to drink the real thing, then drink almond milk. But cow milk is not for humans. It's for the little calves. But nevertheless, another way to the industry to make money and to kill you slowly. But so don't take my words as I'm recommending to you to drink milk or eat milk. This is not in our human diet, by the way. But nevertheless, just for the sake of the example, I have good, perfectly milk on one side, and then I have a good piece of meat on the other side, totally kosher, coming from a kosher animal, slaughtered exactly how the Torah told me to do it. Two different entities, perfectly. Put them together, I can't put them together. So, interestingly, the same way that we have these two items right now, two entities that are good together, but separately they're good, together they're not. There are two things in the Torah that are prohibited when they're prohibited, but when they're together, they're permitted. And that's called shatnez. Where do we see that? Because if you ask any person that read the Torah once, they'll tell you, but the Torah tells you you're not allowed to wear shatnez. Shatnez means mixing wool and linen. Now, why would somebody mix wool and linen? If I have a nice sweater made out of wool, why would I mix it? I want to make it 100% cotton, right? The problem is that wool is not such a strong fiber. And in certain places, like the collar or the shoulder, when the connection is not so strong, then what would many people would do? Take some linen, which is much stronger fiber, much stronger, and tie, the stitches on the pieces on the shoulder or the neckline, and put it together. And up until today, it's done. But nevertheless,
in 18th century, they used to have actually leave them together.
Yeah, 100%. But nevertheless, the Torah is telling me that I'm not allowed to mix the wool and linen, and everybody will tell you, I know the prohibition of shatnez. But in the same way that the wool and the linen is prohibited, there is a place in the Torah that will tell you that you have to put the wool and linen together, and it's a mitzvah, and it's a chiyuv. I'll give you 3.5 seconds to think if you can run through your memory and where you have to mix the wool and linen. Somebody heard, I heard in the background, in the Kohen, the clothes of the Kohen. In the clothes of the Kohen, when there's a certain belt, then it's made from 3 fibers of wool and 1 fiber of linen, and it's a chiyuv. You have to. Wow. So the Torah is telling me I'm not allowed to mix wool and linen. One of the connections of what's called kilaim, of mixing. But on a different situation, in the clothes of the Kohen, of the priest, and specifically a Kohen Idiot, not a Kohen Gadol, there's different types of garments, that not only that that it's okay, that I have to. So sometimes this mixture is negative, and sometimes this mixture is positive. Now go ask the common sense in the Torah. So hold that question, we'll answer that at the end. The concept of kilaim is a mixture. The translation of kilaim is a mixture. Then this is called a prohibition connection, a prohibited connection. Whether it's wool and linen, meat and dairy, 2 animals together, you're not even allowed to connect 2 trees together. Can't take 2 pieces of the branches and connect them together. And I know there's a big question now, are you allowed to do genetically modified food? Okay, here's your answer. But there's a big question in halakha, can you genetically modify food? Because if you can, then how is it kosher? And how are all the kosher agencies giving certification to genetically modified food? So we're not going to get into that. It's a big question in halakha. Okay? If you can mix that and change the genetics of food. And again, I'm not an authority of halakha, but forget about even the halakha. The genetically changing something that's already on the surface, pretty clear that it would be not accepted by the Torah. So don't ask me why they give certifications to that. You know my strong opinion about the kosher certification agencies. And if you don't, I'll repeat it. It's all fake. It's all fraud. It's mafia. It's money and control and power. Not something that you need to necessarily run after and believe it so easily. The problem with saying the truth is that just this morning I woke up, well, not first thing in the morning, but later on when I went to check my emails, I get 2 emails from YouTube that another 2 videos of mine were removed because of false, how do they call it? That I'm giving wrong medical information. Right? So I had another 2 videos now being removed from YouTube. They don't even talk about anything. The one video is about the anti-Semitism in America that was loaded like 3 years ago, and way before the corona, and another video is about Gog and Magog. But it happens to be that in that videos I'm probably saying how bad vaccines are or whatever. YouTube decides to take them off. After 3 years, now you remember to take them off. 500,000 views, and they take it off because I probably said something that is the truth about whatever. So it's very dangerous to say truthful things, and now they gave me a penalty if I do it again. They close my channel again and whatever. So where can you find the videos? I don't know if they're on BitChute, but Rumble, I don't know. I have to see. But they were removed from YouTube. Why? Because you say the truth, somebody doesn't like it. So people don't like when I say that the kosher certification agencies, the majority of them, it's all fraud. It's mafia, it's money, it's how much money you put on the table. You know my story with the donkey, and if you don't, I'll tell you the story again. That one guy, I'm sorry, I'm sidetracking from our topic. But there's a story that a guy comes to the rabbi and tells him, Rabbi, don't ask, I have horrible news. My donkey died today. I'm so sad, I'm heartbroken, but I have a request from you, my dear rabbi. I want you to say Kaddish on the donkey. What? You want me to say Kaddish on the donkey? We don't say Kaddish on the donkey. And for the ones who don't know what's Kaddish, it's a certain prayer that we say for 11 months, 3 times a day, on the person who died, a certain prayer to protect the person who died. So the rabbi says, we can't say Kaddish on the donkey. It's a donkey. And we say Kaddish on a human being. The man tells him, you don't understand, Rabbi, this donkey was in my family for the last 20 years. He's my business partner. He's part of the family. I want you to say Kaddish on the donkey. And the rabbi tells him, I understand your deep connection to your donkey, but we don't say Kaddish on a donkey. So he says, listen, Rabbi, I'm willing to give a donation. He says, it has nothing to do with a donation. You can say Kaddish on the animal. So the man tells him, oh, you know what, Rabbi, if I'm going to go across the street to the Reform Shul and give them a $100,000 check, they will say Kaddish on the donkey. So the rabbi told him, why didn't you tell me the donkey was Jewish? So, as they say, money talks, and I was about to say money makes the world go round, but nothing is turning around here. So let's say money talks and other things, you know, the rest. And so it's the same thing everywhere. The Torah tells you, Kesef yaver einei tzadikim. Money blinds the eyes of the righteous people. It's all how much you put on the table. You put a nice fat $45 million check a year, everything will be kosher. So now they're making worms kosher, right? Coming up with all sorts of nonsense. No worms, insects. Somebody asked me the other day a question. I said the answer is no. So a few days later, I saw the person. I said, no, whatever happened? No, I found a rabbi that said yes. Okay, so it depends who you ask. You always find a rabbi that will say yes. You need to know where to look. I said, excuse me?
I thought kilayim only applies to grapes.
No, kilayim is a title of any type of mixture together, because kilayim is also with animals. Lo lacharosh shor v'chamor bedisho. You can't like plow a land with a donkey and ox together. So, no, it's kilayim is everything. Kilayim is the name of a mixture that is prohibited. So it can be in food, it can be with animals, and it can be with inanimates. So kilayim is the title. The translation of kilayim is when you put two things together, there is a wrong mixture. So just to now, let's backtrack to where we left. So the donkey was Jewish according to the rabbi, so he was able to say Kaddish on the donkey. That's how many agencies work. And again, some are good, many are bad. Don't be fooled, blinded, or naive. Even in the world of the Torah, there's a lot of corruption when it comes to certifications, conversions, and many other things, fake marriages. Unfortunately. So let's now backtrack. So yes, kosher certification agencies in many of the cases will give certification to GMO, which is again another big question. How you give certification to GMO? And they'll come up with all sorts of explanations. Why? And it's the product that is kosher, not the connection. There's all sorts of... I question why once, how come Coca-Cola is kosher? Why would Coca-Cola be kosher? So the answer that I got, the products are kosher. So yeah, but the end product, like the products that make it, but the end product is harmful. So how can that be kosher? So the answer, the rabbinical answer that I get, yeah, but the product and the process and the ingredients, doesn't matter. I can put a lot of ingredients that are kosher and make poison out of it. Would that be kosher? Then maybe halachically there's a loophole to tell you, yeah, it's kosher. But yeah, but morally you're killing somebody. And there's a prohibition in the Torah, "Unishmartem lenafshotechem," right? You have to guard yourself. So how can a rabbi give a certification to something that is proven to be bad for you? I don't know. Right? Okay. I'm glad you agree.
In some sodas, they actually, if you look at the ingredient, there's about 15 or 20 different chemicals.
It's not only in the Coca-Cola, it's in many things. That's what I'm saying. If You know, now they're saying they're putting whatever fetuses in Coca-Cola and worms. There's nothing good, nothing kosher about it. Either way you're looking at it. And again, when you question an agency, how come you certify something like Coca-Cola? Yeah, because what do they get from Coca-Cola a year? 50 million? 40 million? 60 million? How many millions somebody's getting there? So that's it. Kesef yaver and tzadikim. Money blinds the eyes of righteous people. And it all depends how fat the check is. And like the rabbi said, why didn't you tell me the donkey is Jewish? Now let's go back. I'm backtracking back where we left. And GMO. So back to kilaim. Kilaim is any mixture that is prohibited. The ones that we know of is meat and dairy, which will be an inanimate. And then with animals can be a donkey and an ox plowing the land at the same time, or putting them together, breeding them, and same thing with seeds, and same thing with the vegetations and many other things. But again, not to lose too much of our focus, it's not a class about kilaim, but nevertheless, the prohibition of kilaim is a connection, a unity, putting two things together that is prohibited by the Torah. And in many of the cases, it makes sense. Wool and linen, I don't see the connection. I will give you a connection very soon. You'll be very happy with what I found. Mixing a donkey and an ox together by plowing the same land, that makes perfect sense. Because the donkey is weak and slow, and the ox is strong. And they're not walking in the same pace. So the ox will walk fast and the donkey will just tag along. That's not nice. That's not good or humane to the donkey. Same thing if you put a donkey and a horse together, they eat in separate times. You know what I mean? So you can, a little bit of common sense here. But when it comes to the shatnez, the wool and linen, in one place the Torah tells me you're not allowed to mix wool and linen. It's a very severe prohibition. But on a different place, the Torah tells me, oh, when it has to do with the Kohen's belt, it's okay. So that has to come with some type of an explanation. The simple explanation, and not to go too much into depth, when the Kohen is on holy ground, like the holy temple, performing his holy work, the shatnez is permitted. But when he stops working and he goes out, he has to take it off and it's already a prohibition. Right? Remember what I just said at the end, I'll put all the dots together. Let's continue. When it comes to shatnez, how come sometimes it's allowed and sometimes it's prohibited? Okay? So there's a few opinions. Let me first explain to you the opinion of Maimonides, of Rambam, why he says that meat and dairy is prohibited. And Rambam has a very beautiful explanation. What does Rambam say? Rambam is Maimonides, for the ones who don't recognize the name. He quotes a story from the Gemara, and I told you that story many, many times. I'll repeat it. A, for the ones who don't know the story. B, for you to remember again. I'm sure you heard the story about Rabbi Anava. Rabbi Anava is the Tana, the rabbi who is the author of the Mishnah, known as Rebbe. And there's a story that one time he's sitting and learning. It was a beautiful day, not like today. And he sits on the grass outside. He goes and he has his papers. He learns Torah. And suddenly he feels something pulling on his jacket. He turns around. He sees a little lamb. A little calf. Actually, egel, a little calf. Sorry. And what happened was that the calf was in the slaughterhouse. He was about to be slaughtered. And he ran away. He saw the knife. He saw the butcher. Ran away. And he comes to get refuge by Rabbi Anava. So Rabbi Anava pushes him away and tells him, go back to the slaughterhouse. That's what you were created for. Wow. That caused a storm in the heavens. And a great prosecution came down. Where's your mercy? Where's your compassion? The little small animal? What are you shooing it away? Go back to the slaughterhouse. And a decree of intense suffering came upon him. Some translated that he had teeth problems. I don't have to tell you, for anyone who had any time a little toothache, you know what that means. And some say it was different types of issues, digesting issues. It's irrelevant. 13 years, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, the Rebbe of the generation, is suffering tremendously, with great suffering, because not showing a little bit of compassion to this little animal. 13 years later, he sits and learns one day, and he sees the cleaning lady around, cleaning the dust or whatever, and there was a little rat in the corner of the room. She takes a broom to come and kill the rat, and he tells her, no, don't touch the rat. And he quotes a verse from Tehillim, V'rachamav al kol ma'asav, and the Master of the universe has mercy on everything that he created. Leave the rat alone. Let it run out. That action shook the heavens again, and the decree was removed. Rambam says that the prohibition of meat and dairy is to put a limit, a separation, an end to cruelty. That when a person has a desire for meat, I mean, there's desires for many different things, but there's a strong desire for many people for meat. Meat to eat, not meet other people. Sometimes my English is not so clear. Desire for meat. Anything that you desire, even if it's allowed, it's not a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing to desire your wife when she's permitted for you. It's good things to desire certain things, but even when you desire something that is permitted, the te'ava, the desire, is not so good. Why? Because when a person has a desire for meat, it would lead him to cruelty. Where do you see the proof? Look in our generation. Most people have an uncontrolled desire for meat, and as a result, look at the cruelty for all the animals in the world. Which will bring another great question in halakha. How can we eat the meat in our generation when the animals go through cruelty? And I said it again, not once and not twice. Maybe this video also will get removed. Watch it fast before it goes down. That most of the meat in our generation cannot be kosher. I don't care how sharp the knife is and how long the beard of the butcher is. Most of the meat in the world right now cannot, because of the cruelty that the animals are bred. That in itself, before you slaughter even the animal, makes the animal unkosher. Forget about now again, like I told you, with kosher certifications and mafia and money and control and power, most of the meat on the shelf is not kosher, starting by the fact how they breed the meat, and then how they slaughter the animals, and so forth. And like I told you before, I don't have great faith in the certifications. You want to eat meat, then raise the animal yourself or get it from a farm where you know how the animal was raised, and you hire a good slaughter, a good shochet, a good butcher to slaughter it for you, to kosher it for you. We're not prohibited in eating meat, but one should definitely reduce it to a minimum for many different reasons. And when Mashiach is going to come very soon, we're not going to eat meat anymore. And I know people question when I say that, but we have korbanot, we have the sacrifices, and the Torah is eternal. So yeah, the mitzvah is for the Kohanim to eat the korbanot, not to you. You're not a Kohen. When you're going to be a Kohen Bet HaMikdash, then we'll negotiate right now. The mitzvah is for the Kohen to eat it. And I know people say Oneg Shabbat, it's you're allowed to. Doesn't mean you have to. But nevertheless, trust when I say that. There's enough sources that tell us when Mashiach is going to come in a later stage, we're all going to go back to become vegetarians. We're not going to eat and consume meat anymore. We're going to be like Adam and Chava, eating from the fruits of the gardens. Besides that, the Arizal says that the only purpose of eating meat is to elevate the meat, and neither one of us can do that and is in the level of even elevating the meat. So if you want to take the elevation of the meat, that can only be done on Shabbat to start with, cannot be done in the middle of the week. So already minimize your meat consumption for the week and eat it on Shabbat. Even on Shabbat, the Arizal says, we're not in the level of elevating the animal. We're a very, very low level. And if you follow all the great tzaddikim from all generations, you'll see that most of them, or all of them, let's say most of them, okay? I'm not going to be cornered now, did not eat meat, and if they did, it was once in a blue moon. Harav Kaduri ate twice a year he ate meat. Erev Yom Kippur, on Suda Mafseket, and on Pesach. The Baba Sali never ate meat. Many of the great tzaddikim never touched meat. And not only because of the kashrut, because I can't elevate the animal, so why do I need to eat it? There's no proof that it's healthy. You can get protein and many other things not from meat. Eat a handful of almonds. It's much more protein than a piece of steak. And if you're looking already at the structure of the human being, we're not carnivores. Our jaws are not built to eat meat. We don't have teeth to chew meat. Our digesting system is not built for meat. But nevertheless, the Torah says, you want to? Okay, eat. You know, up until Noah, up until the flood, we weren't allowed to eat meat. After the flood, it was already permitted. It's not obligated, but it's permitted. Same thing here. Rambam says that the prohibition of mixing meat and dairy is to stop me from pursuing my desire, my lust for meat, that will cause me to come to cruelty. And Rambam was right, because you see in our generation, the greed and the lust, the desire for meat, how it brings cruelty to the animal. That's it, end of story. You can't argue with that. Go to any chicken coop, any farm, you'll see how they raise the animals. Sorry to tell you, that's 100% cruelty, unless they're, roaming on some land. The chickens are in chicken coops like this. They can't even move. Their beaks are being broken, so they're not going to peck each other from going crazy. They're injected with tons of hormones and antibiotics and all sorts of junks and chemicals. And so Rambam says, you're allowed to slaughter an animal, but you're not allowed to become, the word he says in Hebrew is chayat teref, a predator. You're allowed to slaughter an animal, but don't become a predator. Don't become an animal yourself. And again, not to put anybody on the spot, you see in our generation and probably in many others before us that the desire for the meat makes us like a predator. I'm going to lock the animal in a box. I'm going to treat it in an inhumane way. Why? Because I want to eat it. So Rambam says, this is to hint to us to put some type of a separation, some type of a mark to cruelty, to stop my desire, to stop my lust for meat, and chas v'shalom should not bring me to any cruelty. Okay. Very interesting, nice explanation. Like I told you before, if I don't understand the whole thing, at least let me understand something. Okay, Rambam brings me some type of understanding. But there's another explanation that I think is more profound, which will answer all the questions that we presented up until now, is that meat and dairy are prohibited because sometimes when things are contrasting each other, then they become dangerous to each other. When things don't always work, certain things don't work, they don't come together, then it will become dangerous. The prohibition is coming to tell me, in other words, that when there's extreme contrast, don't try to put it together. That's it. Anything that is under the umbrella of kilaim, I told you, can be wool and linen, can be two animals, can be the meat and the dairy, can be seeds, can be breeding animals. There's a whole masechet in the Mishnah about kilaim. Don't read the whole masechet, you'll see exactly what it's encountering. Everything that is under the umbrella of kilaim is a manifestation or representation of the midot that is called chesed and gvura. There are 10 sfirot in the world above. The whole world is controlled and governed by the 10 sfirot. 3 of them are called intellectual, mochin, chokhmah, bina, and dat. But the major 2 midot that we are aware of, and you see that our entire life is controlled and we behave according to them, is chesed and gvura. Chesed is kindness, represented by the right side, with the motion of giving and flow and outwards, and the other side is gvura, restriction and severity and holding back. Everything that we do in our life is a manifestation of chesed and gvura. Everything that you can think of, every motion and every action that I do is chesed or gvura. Either I come close or I move back. Whether it's joy or the opposite of joy, or whether it's going outwards or restriction, doesn't matter what you do. How are you going to analyze it? It's a reaction of 2 midot that are called chesed and gvura. That they're completely not connected, completely contradict each other. They're total different contrasts. in the world above, if you do it the right way, then you bring them together in a healthy way, then it will birth, what the teachings of Kabbalah explain, it will birth another midah of tiferet, of unity. But chesed and gvura in most cases don't work. They don't go together. A few years ago I explained in one of the Zohar classes that the meat and the dairy is prohibited based on the teachings of the Zohar because the meat is rooted in the sphere of gvura, and since the color of the sphere of gvura is red, that's why meat, like real meat, I'm not talking about chicken right now, is red, considered red meat. So the meat is a manifestation of gvura. And milk, the color is white, like the sphere of chesed, which is white, then it's mixing the chesed and the gvura not in the right way, which causes chas v'shalom a great short circuit, so to say. That's what the Zohar says. But every motion in our life is subject to either it's coming from a motion of chesed, of giving, of loving and caring, or the motion of restriction, of taking back, holding back, which is gvura. Whether I will come close or I will move backwards. I'm not allowed to put two contrasts together. Whether it's people right now, whether it's animals, doesn't matter what it is. Two things not meant to be connected, don't put them together. The Midrash says something very, very powerful. I told you before that in regard to the wool and linen, there's a great answer. Really, we don't really know the restriction of wool and linen. There is a story, I told you that a few times. I actually don't remember if it was by the Megalei Amukot, or I don't remember the source right now. But I told you that story a few times, that there was once some type of a plague, a real plague, in a city. And they noticed that the Jews are not affected by that plague. The city council, whatever it was, they couldn't understand. How come we're all being affected by the plague and the Jews are not affected? So they were sitting there like a committee, and one of the people said, you know what? The Jews eat kosher. Maybe we all start eating kosher. Maybe that's the reason. The whole city went kosher. Nothing. The plague still affected them. Okay, so another person says, you know what? They circumcised themselves. Maybe it's that. Everybody got circumcised. Didn't work. They tried almost anything what the Jews do, and it didn't work for them to be saved from the plague. One time, there's a story that a Jew goes to a doctor who's a non-Jew, and the doctor tells him, take your clothes off and lie on the bed, so I'll check you. The Jew tells him, I can't lie on this sheet, because the sheet is made from wool and linen. We're not allowed to lie down on shatnez. It's not only wearing the shatnez. You're not allowed to lie down on a sheet that is wool and linen. And the doctor tells him, why? And the person says, because it brings great diseases. And when the doctor said that, they stopped the whole shatnez in the city, and the, so to say, plague was removed. So we do have some secrets of Kabbalah that shatnez causes diseases. Okay, but that's not what I'm talking here about. I'm sure you are familiar with a certain verse that we sing once a week on Erev Shabbat, at the Shabbat table, Eshet Chayil Mi'imtza, which is can be found in the book of Proverbs of Mishlei, chapter 31. The verse is in verse 13. Now, I know many people think it's Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, who actually wrote the Eshet Chayil. I told you that. We went through that. We gave a good long class about it. The Eshet Chayil is the eulogy that Avraham Avinu wrote to Sarah when she died. Later on, Shlomo HaMelech took it and put it in the book of Proverbs. But it's not Shlomo HaMelech who wrote it. Now, in verse 13, there's a very unclear few words. And it says, Darsha Tzemer Ufishtim. Right? It should be familiar. You probably sing Eshet Chayil every Friday. The Midrash says, and the translation is, she seeks wool and flax. So the Midrash says, what's the big, what causes her to be a Eshet Chayil, a woman of virtue, seeking wool and flax? The Midrash gives an unbelievable answer, because don't forget, the eulogy is on Sarah Imenu. The Midrash says that Sarah Imenu separated between Yitzchak and Ishmael. She saw what's going on, and she put an end to it, and she kicked Ishmael out of the house, and she put an end to it, which Avraham Avinu didn't take that very well. He wasn't so happy, even though Ishmael maybe was a troublemaker, but he was still his son, coming from a different wife, but Avram wasn't happy about it. And Hashem intervened and said to Avraham Avinu, whatever Sarah tells you, you accept. But Avram didn't like that. Sarah intervenes and she takes Ishmael, she kicks him out of the house. When the Midrash says, Darsha tzemer ufishtim, she seeked the wool and the flax, that means that she separated Yitzchak and Ishmael. Why? The Midrash says, when Avraham Avinu asked her, why are you separating Yitzchak and Ishmael? So Sarah answered him, because the brotherhood of Cain and Hevel caused murder. Right? So what's the connection? When Cain and Hevel brought offering to Hashem, what did Cain brought? The linen. Right? He brought Pishtan. The worst of the worst, but that's the offering that Cain brought, the linen. What did Hevel bring? The wool. He brought the sheep, the wool and the linen. Cain didn't like that and turned against Hevel and killed him. Sarah says the wool and the linen, that's the connection between the brothers Cain and Hevel that caused murder. They weren't meant to be next to each other. Forget about right now if Cain is evil or not. Irrelevant. Two brothers don't get along for whatever reason. Separate them. Don't put them together. You put them together, one will murder the other. Yitzchak and Ishmael not meant to be together. Put them to separate them. Avram didn't like that. In Avram's mind, she did a very bad thing. Can you imagine? The wife is telling the husband, get rid of your other child. She did a very, in one way, daring but horrible thing. And some say that the hate of Ishmael to us is because of that. That's what, by the way, the Ramban says. The Ramban says that because of this act, the hate of the sons of Ishmael is up until today to the sons of Yitzchak and Yaakov. But nevertheless, Sarah is coming and telling us, when there's brothers that don't fit together, separate them. That's the deep explanation of Darsha Tzemer Ufishtim. She seeked the wool and the flax. Because on the surface, that makes sense. Some shidduchim, some marriages, connections, partnerships, neighborships, however you say, how we say, neighborship, neighborhood, neighbor something. In Hebrew it's called shchenut. How would you say it in English? Neighbors what? Acquaintance. No, because acquaintance can be somebody in my place of work. Shchenut is my next door neighbor. Neighbors. Not all the connections work. What? No, neighborhood, that's like the whole neighborhood. Nevertheless, you got the point what I'm saying. There's certain shidduchim, marriages, they shouldn't be put together. Whether it's a business partner, a neighbor, whatever it is. If you see it doesn't match, don't put it together. Separate it. Sometimes it hurts, but that's the reality. Which kind of answers your question, or many other people's questions. I have somebody in my life that is bad for me. It's toxin for me. Do I need to have them around me all the time? No. You don't. Something bad comes out of it, then I know it's your father, your mother, your child, your friend, your neighbor, your spouse. It's not good. The Torah is not promoting divorces, but in some of the cases, if the wedding is not the right, then get a divorce. Break the partnership. Move away. Interestingly, specifically with shatnez, when it's worn on a kohen doing a mitzvah, that is permitted. It's positive. But why? Because the kohen walks into the temple in a state of humility. of humbleness, of selflessness, making a place to connection. No ego. A Kohen cannot have an ego to come and work in Beit HaMikdash. So when a person lowers themselves, no ego, complete humility, then there's no problem. There's not going to be a friction. The second that he goes out, he's not in his job anymore. Then might come some type of arrogance or ego or whatever. Then it can chas v'shalom cause a separation. Now the ultimate is to not to separate. That's the best. That's what you have to strive for. Not to disconnect. A relationship, children, parents, whatever it is, you have to first strive to bring a connection. But after you tried many times and you see it doesn't work, then let it go. So of course we have to strive to bring the connection, but that's only when there's the desire to make it work. If both sides want to make it work. If one side doesn't want to make it work, it's not going to work. Don't try even. In order for the shatnez, for the connection to be good, has to be the desire and the will to make it work from both sides. Then it would work. Now where do you see a great example to that? Is that in our faith, most people don't accept each other. This person is from this group, this person is from that group, they don't like each other. I'm talking about groups in Judaism, whether it's Hasidic groups or Ashkenazi, Sephardi, call it however you want. On the surface, everybody's pretending that they like each other. But the reality is they don't like each other. He's Sephardi, she's Ashkenazi, he's Chabad, he's Breslev, and that's the bottom line. I mean, you can pretend as much as you want. The reality is that in most circles, they don't accept the other. He thinks different, I eat like this, he eats like that. For me, the rule is like this, for you, the rule is like that. And the reality is that since there's a disagreement, then there's hate. But we hold by this, and he holds by that, and you know what I'm talking about? I see by your reactions. That's the truth. There's no other way around it. You can, how do you say, pretend, wishy-washy. There's a lot of dislike between different groups. Because how they dress, how they pronounce their words, how they pray after the sundown, maybe before the sun goes down. So, I told you that already, that there's a concept in the teachings of Kabbalah that is called Katnut HaMochin and Gadlut HaMochin. And I explained that in depth. Gadlut means broad and seeing things in a very broad way. Katnut is a very limited way. Most people, as much as they learn Torah, their way how they relate with others is Katnut HaMochin. You don't fit to my opinions, I have no common ground with you. That would lead to a disagreement. That's Katnut HaMochin. Gadlut HaMochin, that I see that what you're doing is good for you, and I accept. I make room. I'm talking all in the line of the Torah, not now going off the path of the Torah. When I have the desire or the will to learn from another person, to accept their opinion, I don't have to agree with you, but to accept your opinion, to open my mind to another type of opinion, that's already Gadlut HaMochin. And I'm limiting it specifically to the world of the Torah right now. If both is based on the Torah, fine. But you'll find many disagreements and contradictions in the Torah that it will bring people to great disagreements. And of course, what would the disagreement would bring to? It would bring to the hate. People hate each other because of their background, because of where they came from, which rabbi they follow. I once sat at a table and I poured myself a drink and somebody screamed at me, "No, no, no!" I thought that's the drink with the poison. He says, "Don't drink it." I was like, "Why?" So he turns the ball around and he shows me the kosher certification. He tells me, "We don't hold by this certification." I told him it's soda water. What are you talking about? No, the rabbi that runs this organization spoke bad about our rabbi. Okay. Makes a lot of sense what you just said now. I will not drink the soda water because this rabbi spoke bad about that rabbi. You're laughing, but that's the reality. And I'm sure you met situations like that. I told you once the joke that one time a person, the ship drowned, he swam to the island, the only survivor. And he lived on the island. A year, 2 or 3, but he learned how to live on the island. 20 years later, a rescue team find him. They come on the island, they see a house and everything. They meet the person. He takes them on a tour on the island. He tells them, yes, I'm stranded here for 20 years. Thank you for coming and saving me. And they see that he developed the whole island. And then he walks down and they tell him, what's this structure? He says, oh, that's the synagogue where I pray in. So they see another structure right in front of him. He says, what is that? He says, that's another synagogue. But you're the only one on this island. He says, you're right. That synagogue, I'm never going in. So that's how sad it is that if somebody doesn't see eye to eye, then I disagree with you, then it will bring me to hate you, to chas v'shalom slander you. And again, that's katnut amochin, that I don't see the needs of another, I don't see the opinion of another. And again, I'm now explaining it in the world of the Torah. We can expand that to everything right now, but I'm focusing specifically on the world of the Torah. Shatnez is prohibited when it's going to cause friction. If there's a desire from both of us to teach and to learn and to accept and to be tolerant, then the shatnez is permitted. When the Kohen goes into the Bet HaMikdash, he's serving Hashem. He's going in with complete humility, complete humbleness. Then it would work. Then the connection would work. That, of course, leads us to another great question. I know it sounds far away, but you know that in a month and a half it's Pesach. Yeah. Well, no, I'm wrong, right? Purim is in 3 weeks. Okay, I'm sorry, a month and 3 weeks is Pesach. So, one thing that we commemorate right when Pesach starts is the Sfirat HaOmer, and we mourn the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Now, can you explain to me how 24,000 students of the leader of the generation, who's the, so to say, the symbol of unconditional love, 24,000 students die, 700 funerals every day. Any common sense here? What's the answer? They didn't give each other the right respect, right? They didn't treat each other nice. Now, how can you be the student of Rabbi Akiva, who teaches you to love any other person, even with their faults? You don't like your other fellow scholar, and they're all very high-level students. Interestingly, when do they stop dying? On Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd day of the Omer, the passing day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died years after. But they still, the plague, so to say, stops on the 33rd day of the Omer. Now why? How can something like this happen? How can be a machloket, a disagreement between the students of Rabbi Akiva, that they don't give honor and respect to each other? So I'm about to say something extreme. I didn't say that. I'm quoting. Don't attack me. Rabbi Akiva was extreme. It's called fanaticism, right? Fanaticism. He was fanatic. He was a Baal Tshuva. He was the extreme Baal Tshuva. Right?
Also called zealot.
Zelt? Exactly.
Zealot.
Exactly. In Hebrew it's called kanai. Thank you. How do you say zelt?
Zealot.
Zealot.
Z-E-A-L-O-T.
Exactly. That's what Rabbi Akiva was.
No, Pinchas.
Exactly, like Pinchas. But Rabbi Akiva came from a point of a Baal Tshuva. Some people become observant, they become too much observant. They become fanatic. Rabbi Akiva, with all his greatness, was fanatic, was kanai. Where there's a place of such behavior, there's no place for tolerance. So the students of Rabbi Akiva were like him. So he couldn't find tolerance to the other students. Can you imagine? And Rabbi Akiva, I mean, you can't argue with Rabbi Akiva, his greatness, his knowledge, his wisdom, what he achieved. But nevertheless, that was his fault. So the students went in his path. And when there's a place of kanaut, of this zealousness, of this extreme, you're not going to come to a place of tolerance, of accepting the other. That's how it is. When I only hold by my opinion, I'm not accepting yours, then it's not going to work. Can't put it together. Therefore, all his students were together. They end up dying. Why did they stop doing this? Why did they stop dying on the 33rd day? Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the ultimate person of that accepting everybody's way. The epiphany. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai preached there is more than one way to serve God. There are many ways to serve God. We have 12 tribes, meaning you have 12 ways to serve God. Every tribe serves God in a different way. The opposite of the students of Rabbi Akiva. The students of Rabbi Akiva was like, there's only one way, my way. That doesn't work, the my way. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, this is wrong. Shatnez, learn to live together. Because there are other ways of serving God. Your way, if it's according to the Torah, that's your way. Many of hold on, with the comments and the questions, many in Judaism, on Friday, or as every day, wear black and white, right? Many don't. Many says you're not allowed to wear black and white on Shabbat. You're not allowed to wear black, on Shabbat. That's taught in the Zohar, by the Ari Kadosh, only white. So many just in white. So who's right? Who's wrong? Thousands, hundreds of thousands wear black on Shabbat. All the Hasidim wore black. Well, maybe not the Breslevers. They wear gold or white, or some of them. So I now should sit in a synagogue and next to me a person wearing black suit and I should not accept him because he follows whatever. That's how you serve Hashem. I serve Hashem with wearing white on Shabbat because I follow these teachings. And now I'm going to hate you. Shatnez is coming to teach me that I have to live together. The meat and the dairy is coming to teach me when there's no way of living together and there's nothing wrong with the separation. You are good, I am good, together we're not good, then we separate. We part our ways. Avraham Avinu told Lot, I am good, you are good, we don't work well together, right? You go wherever you want. Wherever you go, I'll go the other direction. I'll send you a postcard on Chanukah. That's it. Not every connection works. Not every time it works. Yes, we need to be together. The Torah wants me to be together. It wants me to work my differences with you. It wants me to be tolerant to you. It wants me to accept you. It wants me to be patient with you. But when the contrast, the disagreement is dangerous, then don't put them together.